Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, this is Jessica and
Barney.
And we are very excited to welcome our special guest to Turn the Page podcast, Syosset Library. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Erik Larson, and I have a new book out called The Splendid and the Vile.
And the subheading for that is A Saga of Churchill, Family, and Defiance During the Blitz.
Yes.
Interesting book. I confess that I haven't finished quite yet. I'm mostly through it, but my question for you is: there are many books out about Churchill, about the Battle of Britain. What was the genesis of this particular book for you, and what do you think this brings that the others in the past had not touched on?
Yeah, well, I think actually this is much to my surprise. I mean, this is actually very different than I think anything that's been done so far on Churchill and in this context. You know, the origin, the writing of history, the way I like to do it is so it really depends on the window that you open up on the past. And if you have a particular question you're trying to answer, you often find new things, and you often look at things that others have gone through in a new way. So the genesis of this was frankly, I mean, I blame this book entirely on New York City. My wife and I moved to New York, to Manhattan about 5 years ago from Seattle. We had our three daughters had flown the coop, and it was just a little bit too sleepy over there in Seattle. So we moved to Manhattan, where I had always wanted to live. I was raised on Long Island. I don't know if you know that, but but as soon as I arrived in Manhattan, again, this was like 5 years ago, I had this kind of an epiphany about 9/11. In Seattle, we watched the whole thing unfold in real time, and it was horrifying, and millions of others around the world watched it as well. But when I got to New York, I realized that the New York experience of residents of the city was just so much incredibly, an order of magnitude more traumatic than anything the rest of us, outside the city had experienced. They would have seen the fire and the smoke and heard ambulances and whatnot. The experience would have been a lot more vivid, intensely so. And this really came to me, and not just that, but the sense of violation of one's, that this happened in one's home city. So I started thinking, I knew a little bit, of course, about the Battle of Britain and the Blitz and so forth, and I started thinking about that almost right away. Like, what, how did those, Londoners cope with essentially 57 nights of bombing in a row? Essentially 57 9/11s in a row, followed by 6 more months of bombings at intervals, but increasingly severe bombings. How do you actually go about coping? Yeah. This became for me kind of a question that I thought maybe I should explore I could explore in a book. It's like, how does one actually deal with it? So I thought about doing the typical London family, and then I thought, well, wait, why not do the quintessential London family? Churchill and his family, his daughters, his wife, and his advisors. Just because, not only did he have to survive on a daily basis, he also had to run one half of a world war. So that's how this all came about.
Mm-hmm. It was, in that regard, in terms of looking at the day-to-day life of people that we, years from now, removed from it, we look at these historical figures as just that, as historical figures, as these people out of the pages of history. And approaching it the way you do really puts a human face on on Churchill. I mean, it never occurred to me. I'm thinking back and look at Churchill's public face, the resolve, the courage under fire, the inspiration that he
which is what he's known for. Yes,
exactly. But then you look at on the other side, and you look at a man who's facing with personal debt. He's got a spendthrift son who's involved in a fairly troubled marriage. I mean, he's got the day-to-day problems that we all deal with, compounded by the fact, as you say, that he's running half of a world war.
Yeah, and that was the whole thing that I really wanted to explore. That's where I thought I could actually bring something new to the whole realm of Churchill scholarship. Just trying to make create as vivid a sense as possible of what it was really like to actually have to go through that.
You know, I at the time of 9/11, I was working in Queens, and when it happened, we heard the radio, we switched on the televisions. A short while later, we were out on the roof of the building looking at the smoke billowing. And as you describe it, and as I recall it, I mean, it was the sense of violation.
Yes, absolutely.
At that moment. But again, it was a moment in time. It was not a constant, prolonged, nightly bombardment of not just the city, but the entire nation, coupled with the very real prospect of an invasion. So the means by which these people coped and got through it is just really fascinating.
Yeah. Well, and you touched on something that to me was, I don't think I was ever aware. I mean, I am now, obviously, but I don't think I was ever aware of how certain people in London and Britain were that England was about to be invaded. That this was virtually, that it seemed to many that this was virtually a certainty. And so, if you can imagine, not just enduring, 57 nights in a row of bombing, but also if you have the conviction that this is just a preamble to an invasion, I mean, how terrifying is that?
Yeah, how do you go about your day to day?
People really actually face the very real prospect of one day looking up from their newspapers in Hyde Park and seeing paratroopers landing on the lawn.
Right, of course.
There was the one point in the book where the comment was that the odds of an individual surviving a night in London were very, very good, but the odds that somebody was going to be killed overnight was a certainty. And survival at that point became really a matter of luck, being in the right place or the wrong place at the appropriate time. And living under those circumstances really had to be harrowing. I found I learned a little bit. Something I had never known about was the Mass Observation Project, which for a historian is just an absolutely fabulous source of materials. Can you talk about the beginning of that project and how it then evolved into this chronicle of the war?
Yeah. So mass observation really was one of the more fascinating elements of this era. Actually, it was a social sciences organization or social science organization that was founded before the war, with the idea of trying to get a rich sense of what daily life was like in Britain, or as the founder said it, to create a social anthropology of ourselves. And so mass observation recruited hundreds of diarists to keep daily diaries and to submit them to mass observations so they could analyze and process and come up with conclusions and observations about society. So along comes the war. The war begins, and a lot of these diarists continue to keep their diaries. And this becomes an absolutely invaluable resource for looking at the nitty-gritty of daily life. One of my favorite characters in the book has sort of a cameo, / Greek chorus role, a woman named Olivia Cockett. She was a clerk in Scotland Yard. She was carrying on an affair with a married man. And her evolution in her diary is really fascinating. She goes from feeling terrified to one day she she puts out an incendiary bomb that has landed near her house. And these incendiaries were what the Luftwaffe dropped first to try to ignite fires in the city so that things would burn, and then these fires in turn would serve as beacons for other bombers that would come and drop high explosive bombs. So one of these incendiaries dropped outside her house, and she put it out one day. She managed to suffocate the incendiary. She put it out, and she was just so emboldened, so elated by this personal act of courage that suddenly her fear began to fall away. And I found that really a very interesting evolution. And she was not alone in that, by the way.
It's almost as if people facing this darkness, there's a sense of liberation in a manner of speaking of, okay, at this point, I don't know what's coming next, but I'm going to live now, live for the moment, and make the best of it. And it's amazing how they did it.
Yeah, there's another diarist from Mass Observation who I do not quote in the book. I mean, honestly, I simply had too much material, and even as it is, it's a 500-page book. There was one woman who had a very interesting reaction. She was out and about, and happened to be a bomb happened to fall quite near, and it really could have killed her. It maybe threw her to the ground, and her afterwards, she was just elated. She wrote in her diary. She said, "I've been bombed. I've been bombed." You know, yeah. She was thrilled, and of course very glad to have survived. But anyway, so Mass Observation proved to be a really, really terrific resource, just for sort of keeping tabs on, what the rest of the world was doing as the Churchills were doing what they were doing.
There was that one quote, I think, from a little kid. Like what was it? Like, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah.
I want to be alive.
He said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" He says, "Alive."
Yeah, that's really.
Yeah, my favorite though is when the woman is recounting the bombing of Coventry, which was really a savage attack. And
yeah.
Two little kids it nearly blew my head off.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really just, it's amazing to see, like through the eyes of these people who are experiencing it.
Well, and also to see Churchill, I mean, we have this image of Churchill as this courageous, man emboldening the public, and you know what? The public perception was real.
Yeah.
I mean, Churchill was fearless, and Churchill, when an air raid threatened or was underway, Churchill was just as likely to race up to the nearest roof to watch as to seek shelter.
So you talk about his children, and he had 5. It's Clementine, correct?
Clementine. Yes,
they had 5 children. How did you decide to focus on the 2 that you chose?
Well, that's the eternal challenge when you're writing history, and especially if you're writing what perhaps amounts to as a family saga or a domestic drama. You could write about everybody, but then it would get rather tedious over time, because honestly, not everybody's story is as compelling as the next one. So to me, though, what seemed very important was to get a sense of Churchill's youngest living child, and that was Mary Churchill, who at the time of the book begins at 17, and then by the time the book ends has turned 18. Because I just wanted to really get a sense of how her relationship with her parents, but also how she viewed the war, how she viewed her father, this heroic figure, and interestingly, she really it's so obvious in her diary how much she loved her father and how she viewed him also as this figure of courage.
She herself was a figure of courage.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, she there's really no evidence in her diary for 1940 and 41 at least of her ever being actually afraid. I mean, she went out to parties and she danced, and refers to snogging in the hayloft and so forth, and how she was thrilled by how the bomber pilots at the nearby bases near the Chequers, prime ministerial country home Chequers, and how they would fly over at treetop level just to thrill the girls, and succeeded. But her own evolution was, I think, really something. She goes from being lodged for safety at Chequers to really starting to chafe at being kept out of the war and wanting to be part of it, and then ultimately, without giving away the ending of the book, she really gets into it. And has near misses with German bombs along the way. So she seemed to me very important, and the son Randolph also very important to me, because he's such a wild kind of ne'er-do-well. And as a father myself, I think about my own daughters, and I think all these things weigh on you. In Churchill's case and in Clementine's case, the safety of their 17-year-old, the life of their son Randolph, and whose marriage was threatened with decline and ultimately collapsed. These things all weigh on you, and in the midst of it all, you got to deal with bombs and rationing and dealing with Hitler and everything else. So it all goes into the mix. But if I was to write about every family member, it'd be hard to paint, to capture people who would run through the book in a vivid way.
I was also intrigued by one line. I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. I'm quoting, but I'm eliminating the source that you quoted in the book. And the line was, "And then on the night of Saturday, August 24, came a navigational error destined to change the nature of the entire war, a piece of carelessness that set the world inexorably on the march toward Hiroshima." And when I read that, and within the context of at the time, and I'll let you describe it more fully, but the German High Command had, up until that point, really been careful to avoid bombing London directly. And Hitler had issued explicit orders that London was to be spared. Hermann Goering, the head of the Luftwaffe, had reiterated that in no uncertain terms to his officers, and they in turn to their pilots. The point being that Hitler, up until that point, until the actual really severe raids began, up until then, Hitler really did not want to attack London, because he didn't want to solidify any more than it already was Churchill's resistance to perhaps doing a peace deal. Hitler really did want to try to bring Britain to the peace table. I mean, make no mistake that at some point down the road he would turn around and try to take Britain as well. But for the time being, he really wanted to eliminate Britain from the war so that he could turn his attentions elsewhere, i.e., the Soviet Union, and consolidate his gains in Europe. He did not want to have a two-front war, but Churchill was really very, very, very defiant. So anyway, along comes August 24th, the night of August 24th. Until now, no bombs had not fallen on central London. I mean, there had been military targets in the vicinity of London, and when you try to, with the inaccuracy endemic at that time, if you sought to bomb a military plant or an airfield outside London, you often wound up bombing neighboring houses. But still, central London had been spared. But on the night of August 24th, this is not correct Luftwaffe terminology, but a squadron of bombers got lost and dumped their bombs on what they thought was a military target, the target they had been allocated, but dumped their bombs on central London, which was a terrifying thing for people who lived in the city, and was a real jolt. It prompted Hermann Goering to send a stern message to the unit involved, saying that whoever involved was basically going to be mustered out of the Air Force and put into the infantry. But that particular raid achieved a couple of things. One,
it opened people's eyes to just, London was not, impervious. But it also gave Churchill an opportunity then to a moral justification to bomb Berlin, which he did, and thus the escalation began. That's why Basil Collier, who is one of the foremost scholars on the Battle of Britain and the Blitz and so forth, he is the one who said that was, in his view, that's what set the world on the road toward Hiroshima. So after August 24th, things settled again into sort of, London was not bombed again, not right away. The city fell back in sort of a sense of complacency. I mean, there were air raid warnings, but nothing happened. And when that happens time and time again, you start to not pay much attention. But then comes September 7th, 1940, and by this time Hitler was fed up, and it's like, okay, now he wants to destroy London. He wants this over, right? So on September 7th, 1940, everything changed.
Well, I want you once again. Thank you so much for talking with us. I mean, your book has multiple holds on it, even before before it was published.
I always like to hear about multiple holds.
We all had to get in line to read this book, and every time your books come out, I mean, just your perspective on history, over and over again, it brings these, as you said, these you open the windows to things that are new, and that look at things from a new direction. And we really, from one Long Islander to another, from two Long Islanders from another, and from all of us at Syosset Library, we love what you do.
Oh, good. Thank you.
We do. I actually, your books are great for book discussions that I do with people who don't like to read nonfiction, and
good.
It works really well for them, and it opens their eyes to another whole world. And we appreciate what you do, and your works are really. We always look forward to the next one.
Well, good. I'm delighted to hear it.
Do you have anything else on the slate that you're able to talk about, or are you going to sit back and kind of let this one?
You mean my next project?
If you have one that you can talk about, if not, we will let that one sail.
No. The problem is I don't have one. I'm not. I believe me, I'm not sitting back, resting or whatever. I mean, I really would like to have a next project online, in my lineup. But it takes me a long time between when I finish a book and when I start to get the next idea. I mean, I'm mulling a couple of things, but. It's a long process.
But you know what? That's where the quality comes from. I mean, that's why people wait for your books. That's why when they come out, they still get excited. I was just at an airport on my way to a library conference, and the gentleman sitting next to me saw me reading an ARC for this interview, and is that a new Erik Larson book? It was really cool, and we love what you do.
Well, I love to hear that, and I still can't quite believe that that's the way it is. But I'm delighted.
Good. Thank you so much for joining us.
So once again, this is Jessica
and Barney
and our special guest,
Erik Larson,
and we are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.